Welcome, innovators, business owners, entrepreneurs, technology experts, academia, government R&D communities, and members of the North Carolina innovation ecosystem. This is Defense Technology Talks, hosted by the North Carolina Defense Technology Transition Office, or NC DefTech. This podcast will showcase various technologies with local and national experts who aim to solve complex national security problems. In the coming weeks, we will highlight North Carolinians with the potential to, or those that have positively contributed to enhancing the capabilities of our warfighters, law enforcement, and first responders. We will also feature government leaders in research and development who have helped shape the future in this domain. These podcasts are just one of the many free services provided by the North Carolina government to assist the North Carolina innovation ecosystem to thrive and provide solutions to our nation. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of Defense Technology Talks. We have a small business showcase today. This is an interesting piece of technology. If you get a chance to check out the website, I think you'll find it very, very compelling. We're going to talk about how we get this thing into the DoD. But without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Corey here, let him talk about himself, talk about his company, and give you guys the opportunity in the audience to get to know him a little bit better and see if there's a use case for his product. But I'll pause there and pass it over to Corey. Tell us about what you do and where you're working for.
Sure. So appreciate this. Looking forward to it. So my name is Corey Barrier, and I work for Active Defender, Chief Development, Business Development Officer. I don't want to say development because I'm not a computer guy. So, look, Active Defender, I believe. Well, let me back up before I go into that. So I'm a best-selling author. I've got a really popular podcast called Successful Life Podcast. I've been in the business arena for, I guess, since 2013, doing various things. I've started and started businesses and failed businesses and have been successful at businesses. So I've kind of seen a little bit all over the spectrum, if you will. So that's a little bit about me. And Active Defender, we're currently in 139 schools. And it's rapidly growing. We're up from first quarter last year. We're up 300% from first quarter last year. So things are really stepping up. We are in the middle of a funding round, and that's going extremely well. We've hit our number. By the end of today, we should have hit our first number. Mm-hmm. My guess is by 30 days, we'll hit the second number. Look, the technology is. I mean, it's built by a guy that was, he built technology for the government. So it's built by the best. I mean, His name is Jim Boyd, amazing dude. He's a bivocational pastor as well. And so this technology gives teachers the ability staff members, I should say, the ability in real time to contact every other staff member. So just imagine if you've got an active shooter coming onto the school right now, your options are send a mass text, maybe, right? Some schools have that, to sound an alarm. But the problem with that is you don't know where the person is. And so our technology tells you, if I see you, you're the active shooter, everybody in that, every staff member is going to know exactly where that shooter is. And the benefit of that is you move away from the shooter. And you probably know this, when people fire a gun, normal, citizens doesn't really, when you sound a gun inside, it doesn't sound like it's gunshots. It sounds like two boards hitting together.
Yep.
And so people go to check out the sound, stick their head out the door, right? And you can see all the problems with that, right? Yep. So it's a little bit about it.
Yeah. So, and I mean, that tremendous application, and so the first part we'll break down and it's like, hey, it was built by somebody who worked for the government. So that's the first part. Right. And one of the things that, and the second piece of it is that you're going through an investment round. And one of the things about investment is, and that's one of the biggest struggles for any business, right? We had a conversation today with NSIN and talking about, some of the prize challenges that they have available. And those prize challenges are great. But again, it's not a capital raise, even though it's non-dilutive funding. I mean, that's a lot of money that kind of goes in there. And from a business perspective, if you've listened to this podcast before, you've heard me talk about this, but one of the issues that businesses always have, particularly small ones in the growth, is, we hear it all the time. Well, three of every 10 businesses fail. That is a fact. 30% do not make it. And then that remaining 7 companies, only about half of those, so 3.5 of those businesses will either grow big enough for somebody to acquire them, or they will become a household name. And so that's ultimately, the end state for the other 7 companies is either, 3.5 of them will get acquired, and then 3.5 of them will become a Microsoft, an Apple, or, some other large company that is recognized both nationally and internationally. Very difficult to do, particularly if you have a niche application. And that's okay, because those niche applications are usually the ones that are a lot more agile and can support a broader audience. And we had this discussion as well today during the coffee call is, sometimes hanging your shingle with the DoD or hanging your shingle with a large corporation is a great idea, but you lose a lot of flexibility as a business when you do that. And if you're okay with that, if that's part of your business plan or your overall business model, perfectly okay. But if you want to remain a business owner and remain agile and be able to make those developments that are very important, then you kind of have to step back and say, okay, is the juice worth the squeeze for me to sell this to company X? And I don't think that's one of the discussions that we have quite often with small business owners, is because they're just trying to stay alive. They're the duck on the pond. Everything looks calm on top, but they're kicking like crazy because they're just trying to keep their company in business. And so, based off of your discussion, the government problem that you're trying to solve, are you just trying to secure facilities and send messaging, or is it something else that you would like to do? Because I know you said that you're in schools. One of the advantages of, the DoD is there's DoD schools everywhere. So how do you tie yourself into that community to provide the same level of fidelity, in an active shooter situation if that were to happen? And I'm sure that there's some international and other agency applications that you could use. But I'll pause there. And what are your thoughts on kind of dipping into that defense area? Is that a thought? Is that a practice that you guys are looking towards, or is it too far away to really think about?
Well, I think it's certainly a thought. I think I think there have definitely been conversations around that. And I can't dive too deep into it, but what I can say is, just imagine if this works for just a regular school system. And quite frankly, we're in a lot of Christian school systems as well, because, well, he's a pastor. So if it works for them, it would work for any organization. If you think about, let's just take like a business, SaaS, right? SaaS is right down the street from me here in Cary. And there's people on that campus that make hundreds of thousands of dollars. And I would imagine you want to protect that person. If you've got the ability, and this runs parallel with anything, like think about people out in the field. Think about your soldiers that are out in the field. They always have a phone, right? So if they can deploy that there's a problem from their phone with a couple of clicks of a button, that's pretty solid.
Yeah. Well, and I think, of course, go ahead. I'll jump in after you finish your thought.
Well, so we're in naturally, because and I don't know if I mentioned this, but we're tied in with law enforcement, all the emergency services. They have to be. Well, we don't have to be. They can elect to not do that, but we've never had anybody, opt out of that. And it's free for the police, the sheriffs, the EMS, the fire department. It's free. So think about this. This is one thing I didn't know. I didn't realize that in my county, and maybe this is all of North Carolina, or maybe it's the whole country, I'm not sure, but I didn't realize that if I dial 911, it goes to the sheriff's office. I live in the city, right? Mm-hmm. And then the sheriff's office has to contact the police station. That seems like an extra step that really shouldn't have to be there. And with this application, it eliminates that.
Yeah. And flatten communications, man. Like we talk about this all the time in the military. Hey, how do I get the widest audience with the least amount of effort? And so that's hugely important, because response time, particularly in like an active shooter situation, or it doesn't even have to be an active shooter. It could be like a mass casualty event, large accident, something to that effect. So like if we have an entire network or neighborhood or county that is operating on active defender, I can ID, hey, look, massive car crash. Here's all the information, and there's other ways that you can layer it on, because one of the things that you have to determine, and one of the things you have to figure out, particularly with, the onset of social media and everything being interconnected through the Internet of Things, which is great, but there's also a huge downside to that because there's latency in the reporting, there's accuracy in the reporting. But if I know that there's a bunch of vetted users that are using this platform, then it makes it a lot easier to utilize as far as being able to pass notifications or send information that way. One of the other aspects that I was thinking of is you're starting to see this growth in the Department of Defense of bringing your own device, right? So if we are allowing soldiers or service members, men and women, to bring their own devices into organizations, well, why not have a secure platform that allows them to message in extremis? Because again, one of the things that we always see is, the EW fight's the EW fight. And we talk about this all the time. But, if I jam cellular networks, that affects me as well because everybody uses the spectrum equally when it comes to that place. So it may not be, it may turn out that Active Defender becomes like the secondary or tertiary method of communication if I'm allowed to bring my own device on mission or whatever. The other thing is application that we talked about earlier is in the defense space, because there's so many, clandestine organizations, fill in the blank, people doing operations in other parts of the country or the world that requires the ability to operate, in relative secrecy. So if I can send a message back to home base, and there's lots of different platforms that will allow you to do it. But that being said, again, somebody carrying a cell phone, that's pretty innocuous. Everybody has a cell phone. So it's much, much harder to pinpoint, that device, particularly if the app is clean and it's built correctly, for somebody to track that thing down. And that's one of the things, and you and I talked about this on the other podcast when I was on yours earlier this week, is, adware and all this tracking data that comes out of cell phones. It's crazy bonkers. And there's a lot of information that is stored on that device. And you could potentially, maximize that aspect of it. The accelerometer, the GPS, and all the things that are in there doesn't necessarily have to be used for a nefarious cause, and that in and of itself, it's always good to hear people that are developing softwares and technologies that, leverage the tool in a method that's a little bit more positive than just trying to sell you more tennis shoes or video games or whatever it is. But I will pause one more time and ask you just to give a little bit more detail. And I know that you said you're in 139 schools. Have you expanded into other markets? Are you looking to kind of grow that? Because we have, community colleges here. We have universities here in North Carolina. North Carolina has a pretty robust academic climate, regardless of whether it be, primary, secondary, or collegiate education. Have you approached any of the universities and tried to wiggle your way in there? Or what's that looking like? What's that front of the opportunity out there looking?
Well, so yes, universities are certainly on our radar for sure. Because think about, it may be hard to figure out if someone's unidentified, like an unidentified person on a university might look a little bit different than an elementary school, right? Because you've got a lot more freedom. But one thing I didn't hit on that I think is really important, you mentioned cellular data or cellular, the maybe you didn't say data, the I'm completely drawing a blank here. Basically, your cell line, right? So
Yeah.
what happens with this is it bounces from either the cell line or Wi-Fi. So
Yeah.
either one, it picks up either one, whatever the strongest signal is. And so that's really important because lots of times people say, well, what happens if the phone gets jammed up? Well, it has the ability to jump to Wi-Fi and it'll take whatever signal is the strongest. So it seemed like there was one more thing that you mentioned that I was going to hit on. Yeah. So you mentioned you didn't say chat, but it has a chat feature, which is
Okay.
driven by AI.
Yeah.
And so the way that works in the schools, and it would work maybe not exactly the same with the military, but the way it works in schools. So imagine you're the administrator, and you've got each teacher has 17 people. Let's just say for just common numbers. Then what happens is we coach them, we teach them how to put in the chat so it doesn't jam up the chat. Oh, little Johnny's missing, or what? They just put their name obviously pops up. They put 17. They have 17 kids. They say they have 17 kids. If all of them are there, well, let's say there's an extra. What we do is we add a plus and we just put that extra kid's name. So therefore, the whole chat you can look at it and see where people are if they're missing. If it's a -1 or -2, then you can look to see if that kid shows up somewhere else.
Yeah, that's a really good feature because again, like when you start talking about a mass casualty situation, I mean, you know, and we're talking about some really grim stuff, so it doesn't hurt to talk about it in detail. But when you look at what happened in Uvalde, like one of the things that a lot of the teachers and the parents were having an issue with was, where's my kid? You know, like you don't want to have a situation where an area is secure and you don't have 100% accountability of all the people that are there. So that is both, you know, on the military side, and it's also on the civilian side, you know, or even corporate side. Like, hey, look, we had an event, earthquake, fire, mass casualty event, whatever it is, and I need to know where my people are, and I need to know as soon as possible. And again, teaching people how to report correctly, like we have entire courses on how to be an RTO in the military, you know, like how do I communicate effectively on the radio? And it's consistently reinforced over and over again every time you go to the field or every time you do some type of exercise. And so being able to report those kind of things like, hey, look, got all my people, got all my tools, you know, got all my stuff ready to continue mission, or, you know, my classroom is secured, whatever the issue is. And so I think that there's a great opportunity to leverage your tool for much greater opportunity than just protecting children. I sound very, very bad by saying that, just protecting children. But what I mean by that is like you can enhance the mission performance like in a emergency situation. And so if the police have the same level of fidelity that the teachers and the administrators do, that's a very, very positive thing, particularly when the unknown is the greatest challenge that anybody faces. So when you're coming into a situation, the more information that I can have before I step through that door, or before I step on that campus, or before I step into that facility is better. You know, I'm thinking one of the things that, like, imagine if we would have had this in the Afghanistan withdrawal, you know, people being able to like, hey, go to this QR code, scan it, install this app so we can track you. So we know where you are, where your family is. And then, hey, if you're not on the app, we're not letting you in. You know what I mean? Like that means you haven't talked to one of our people on the ground that have, you know, allowed you access to our system. And it seems like a very rudimentary thing, but I think that would be something that could help streamline and prevent so much chaos. You know, because again, when resources are finite, people tend to not act like adults.
100%. And you know, you mentioned the QR code, which I think this is a fascinating piece of this. And I probably would have forgotten to tell you if you hadn't mentioned it. So imagine, you know, I'll just use the school as an example because that's where we're primarily at. If you've got a QR code on the concession stand and there's a football game, right? All kinds of stuff happens at football games.
Mm-hmm.
We've got it set up to where a kid or a parent or whoever's near that concession stand or wherever we put that QR code can scan it and it will act just like it would if you had this installed on your phone.
Wow. And that's great, you know. And so again, a web-based tool or an app-based tool that you can leverage. And again, that's one of the things like I would be interested to see, and I say this now just because, you know, we're talking about it as DoD applications. I'd be interested to see if you can migrate some type of this onto ATAC, you know, or to have the ability to kind of cross over with some of the other platforms that the military is using. So if I can bring it on to ATAC, or if I can bring it on to other, you know, things that are utilized, I think that would be interesting just to see, you know, what other crossover there is, if any, for your application. So there's a lot of ways that you can go, and it's like very, very impressive. Like when I read it, I was like, yeah, this is super, super useful tool. Where was this 5 years ago? Where was it 5 minutes ago? You know, because there's a lot of people that there are a lot of families that are hurting because of active shooter events or for mass casualty events or whatever. Hey, you could probably even use this on Black Friday. You know what I mean? Like, hey, look, send out the app to your selected group of folks. It's like, hey, look, the TVs are good at, you know, Walmart on Ramsey Street, but they're not so good at Target. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know, but I think there's useful applications of being able to share information and minimize, you know, collisions with other human beings. So I think that's very, very important. Last thing, Corey, before we close this thing out, is if there is an interested party out there, you know, that wants to know more about Active Defender, where can they find your stuff? And, you know, where can we find more about you? Because I know you said you had a podcast and you've done some other business stuff and you seem like you'd be a great business coach. for a small business that's growing or somebody that's thinking about entering into the small business space. So I'll pause there, give you a chance to plug all your stuff.
Well, it's interesting you say that. The word coach is thrown around so much. Really, that's what I've been doing the past, I guess, 4 years is working with people in the construction industry and coaching their business owners. So you're 100% spot on with that. One thing I did want to say really quickly is it live streams the audio and the video from whatever device it's deployed from. So if it's your computer and you're the secretary sitting at the front desk, we usually advise to have a dual camera and have a camera sitting out. So that way, if they deploy it, it records everything. Now they don't have to do that, but I think it's a pretty incredible benefit. So active-defender.com is where people can go to learn more about this. And if you want to reach out to me, feel free. It's just COREY at active-defender.com. And please check out the podcast. It's it's not just on things like this, but I give a different perspective on a lot of different things. So it's called Successful Life Podcast.
Awesome. Corey, I appreciate your time. Again, this is another one of those small business showcases. We could go a lot deeper with this. At least I could personally, and talk a lot more about, the use of all these different tools. I mean, we had a great discussion about AI, ML, like the amount of data. So imagine, I'm thinking about this, like the ability to diagnose a scenario afterwards would be huge, particularly if I have audio and video from multiple different vantage points. And that is not something that you want a human to do. Like that's a great use for AI is like, hey, parse these things up, figure out who is looking from what vantage point and kind of build the complete package at the end. So I think that's a great opportunity as well with your technology, but really enjoyed this conversation. I appreciate you coming on. I mean, it was a quick turn. We did 2 podcasts in less than 48 hours, which is super cool. But the other part of it is like it's informing our community. So again, if you are in the North Carolina innovation ecosystem and you are not willing to jump on an episode of Defense Technology Talks, I don't know why. This is a free service for you. We provide opportunity for you to talk about your product. And, you meet interesting people like every week by doing this process. And the other part of it is it creates opportunity for you to, break out of your shell a little bit. Because again, one of the difficult things about starting or maintaining a business is the first step through the door. So if you're afraid to kind of open that door and walk in, then you're missing out on some opportunities. And we have some great people in North Carolina to help shepherd the process, whether that be people in uniform, people that are in academic institutions, or, just the people around the street that come from the Department of Defense that are in our area that are willing partners to say, hey, look, I don't have the answer for that particular question, but I can definitely push you in the direction of a person that does. And so all of these things are very, very important and valuable to your overall success as a business. But again, this is Rob Robinson along with Corey Barrier from Active Defender. And this has been your small business showcase here on Defense Technology Talks. And we will talk to you guys next time. Thanks. Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Defense Technology Talks, hosted by the North Carolina Defense Technology Transition Office, or DefTech. The views expressed in this broadcast are solely those of the individual contributors. As indicated, DefTech does not take responsibility for those statements or opinions and accepts no responsibility or liability for any inaccuracy or omissions reported during this program. The content and interviews are fair use for instructional purposes and to build awareness for the North Carolina innovation ecosystem. The full version of this presentation has been uploaded to our Mobilize platform. Mobilize is just another free service provided to you to access more national security and business collaboration opportunities. You can sign up for more information at deftech.nc.gov. Join us soon for the next podcast coming to a platform near you. DefTech is a subsidiary of the North Carolina Military Business Center and receives its support from Fayetteville Technical Community College.